The Mercer estate stood at the edge of Hollow Creek, shrouded in fog that never seemed to lift. Locals said it was the only place where time refused to move forward, where echoes of laughter from long-dead children still floated through the broken windows. For over a century, every Mercer daughter had met the same fate, dead at 12, their hearts stopped in their sleep, their faces frozen in terror. By 1989, only one child remained, Clara Mercer. She was 11 years, 11 months, and 29 days old when she began hearing the whispers. They came at night, low and trembling, seeping through the cracks in her bedroom wall. Sometimes they called her name. Sometimes they just counted, slowly, deliberately, as if keeping time with her heartbeat. Her mother, Evelyn, had spent her entire life preparing for this year. The calendar in her study was marked in red for Clara's birthday, the day history said her daughter would die. But Evelyn was not like the women before her. She refused to bury another child. The townsfolk told her to leave the house, to burn it down if she had to, but Evelyn knew the curse wasn't in the walls, it was in the blood. And blood, no matter how far you ran, always found its way home. That winter, the mirrors in the house began fogging over without reason. Words appeared on them, written by unseen hands. She will join us. The air grew colder, even as the fireplaces burned day and night. Evelyn locked the attic, but Clara had already gone inside. She said she heard someone up there, someone who sounded like her. That's when she found the first journal, its pages brittle and inked in brown. It spoke of a promise, a ritual, and a name that had been whispered for generations. Evelyn read it aloud only once, and the lights flickered. Somewhere deep beneath the Mercer land, something woke up. As the final night approached, Clara stopped sleeping. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw 12 girls in white gowns, standing in a circle, whispering in unison. Each one had her face. Each one mouthed the same words. "You're next." The legend of the Mercer family began long before anyone alive could remember, woven into the whispers of a small Appalachian town that had long since learned to keep its distance from the decaying Mercer estate. Locals said the land was cursed, that the earth beneath the grand, rotting house was soaked with more than rainwater. Every generation carried the same dreadful pattern. Each time a daughter was born into the Mercer bloodline, the clock began ticking down to the same tragic moment, her 12th birthday. Not one girl had survived past it. There were no exceptions, no miracles, only the same grim outcome repeated for over a century. The men of the family either left or went mad, and the women lived in constant dread, their lives consumed by fear of the inevitable. It wasn't just death that took the Mercer girls, it was something unseen, something that left no mark, no wound, no rational explanation. The doctors called it heart failure. The town called it the Mercer curse. The story was passed down through generations like an inherited nightmare. Some said it began with a deal made in desperation during the late 1800s, when the Mercer patriarch, Thomas Mercer, lost everything in a flood that swallowed his farmland and half his family. Legend claimed he had wandered into the woods one night and returned with riches beyond measure and a new child on the way. 9 months later, his wife gave birth to a girl, and from then on, tragedy became tradition. That first daughter died the night before her 12th birthday, her face contorted in horror, eyes open wide as if she had seen something no human should. The following generations repeated the same terror, each mother hoping, each father denying, and each child gone before she had a chance to become anything more than a name etched on a cold stone. By the time the story reached the late 20th century, the Mercer curse had become more than a family tragedy, it was folklore, a ghost story whispered around fires and in darkened schoolyards. Children dared each other to walk past the Mercer property at night, claiming they could hear faint lullabies coming from the second-floor window, the kind only mothers sing to the dead. The house itself seemed to resist time, its wooden bones groaning under the weight of sorrow, its mirrors covered to keep the past from looking back. And yet, in 1989, the cycle was destined to turn once more. Another daughter, Clara Mercer, had been born 11 years earlier, and the people of Hollow Creek braced themselves for history to repeat. But what they didn't know, what even the Mercers themselves had forgotten, was that the curse wasn't finished evolving. This time, one daughter would live long enough to tell the truth behind what had been haunting them all along. In 1989, the Mercer household stood as the last remnant of a decaying legacy, and inside its walls, fear had become a way of life. Clara Mercer was approaching her 12th birthday, and for her mother, Evelyn, every passing day felt like walking through a minefield of dread. She had grown up hearing the stories, watching her own mother and grandmother wither under the same shadow of helplessness. Each generation had promised to end the curse, and each had failed. But Evelyn was different, determined, stubborn, and consumed by the belief that this time she could stop it. She refused to let history write her daughter's fate before her eyes. Unlike the Mercer women who had accepted their doom, Evelyn fought against it with a desperation that bordered on madness. The house, with its rotting beams and whispering halls, seemed to resist her defiance. Clocks stopped without reason, doors locked themselves, and the air carried a strange heaviness that made it hard to breathe after sunset. Evelyn prayed, burned sage, read from old scripture, and even invited a priest to bless every corner of the home, but none of it eased the sensation that something ancient and unseen was watching her child. Clara had begun to notice the change too. She caught her reflection moving slightly out of rhythm, her laughter echoing seconds too long, and once, she woke in the middle of the night to find her bedroom door standing open though she was certain she had locked it. The closer she drew to her birthday, the stronger the presence became. Evelyn started sleeping in a chair beside Clara's bed, clutching a candle that never seemed to burn down. She had researched every account of the Mercer curse, uncovering old coroner reports, yellowed letters, and family journals hidden beneath floorboards. All pointed to the same horrifying pattern. Each girl's death occurred precisely at 12:03 a.m. on her 12th birthday. No struggle, no noise, just silence. Evelyn counted down the days, her body weakening under the strain of sleepless nights and mounting dread. One evening, as thunder rolled across Hollow Creek, Evelyn heard Clara whispering to someone in her room. When she opened the door, the girl was standing before the mirror, her hand pressed flat against the glass, murmuring a name Evelyn didn't recognize. The reflection smiled a second too late. That night, Evelyn swore she saw movement in the shadows, small hands brushing against the wallpaper, faint giggles echoing in the dark. The realization hit her like cold steel. The curse wasn't waiting for Clara's birthday. It had already begun, and this time, it wasn't coming for a life, it was coming for a soul. It began subtly, the kind of small disturbances that could almost be dismissed as tricks of the mind, but inside the Mercer house, nothing was ever truly ordinary. A week before Clara's 12th birthday, the mirrors started to fog over even when there was no heat or breath near them. At first, Evelyn thought it was condensation, the house reacting to the chill of early spring, but then words began to appear, faint, scrawled by invisible fingers. Asterisk she's coming. Asterisk the letters would fade as quickly as they appeared, leaving behind a thin film of moisture that smelled faintly of iron. Clara claimed she saw faces behind the glass, blurred outlines watching her, mouths moving soundlessly as if trying to speak through the reflection. Evelyn covered every mirror in the house with sheets, but the next morning, they were all uncovered again. Portraits that had hung for generations began to change. The oil paintings of long-dead Mercer women, their faces serene and timeless, began to bleed from the eyes. Crimson streaks dripped down their cheeks, staining the gilded frames. When Evelyn tried to scrub the red away, it wasn't paint, it was something wet and warm, something that pulsed faintly against her fingertips before vanishing. At night, whispers crept through the hallways, soft and rhythmic, like a chant half-remembered from childhood nightmares. Clara would wake to the sound of footsteps pacing just outside her room, and once, she swore she saw someone standing at the end of her bed, pale and motionless, hair hanging over her face. Evelyn ran in moments later, but the figure was gone, leaving only the scent of old earth and decay behind. The attic, locked for decades, became the source of the strongest noises. Scratching, dragging, sometimes faint laughter, sounds that always stopped the moment someone tried to open the door. Clara asked her mother why the attic had been sealed, but Evelyn could only whisper that some doors were never meant to be reopened. One night, a sharp thud echoed from above, followed by the slow creak of floorboards. Dust sifted down from the ceiling, and a single, delicate handprint appeared on the attic door, pressed from the inside. That was when Evelyn realized the house wasn't haunted in the way the townsfolk believed. It wasn't just the spirits of the dead Mercer girls trapped inside, it was something far older, something feeding on the cycle of their fear and death. The walls themselves seemed alive, breathing with the memories of every lost daughter. As the nights grew longer, the house felt less like a home and more like a living tomb, waiting for the next Mercer child to claim. Clara had always been a curious child, drawn to the hidden corner of the house where no one else dared to linger. It was during one of these quiet wanderings that she stumbled upon the first of the old journals buried beneath a loose floorboard in her mother's study. The book was wrapped in brittle lace, its leather cracked and faded, the ink inside almost rust-colored with age. The handwriting belonged to her great-grandmother, Eliza Mercer, a woman whispered about in the family as the one who started it all. The entries began innocently enough, filled with descriptions of daily life, church gatherings, and the births of her children, but as the pages darkened, so did the tone. Eliza wrote of voices calling from the woods, of dreams where her unborn daughters wept blood, and of a man who came to her when her family's fortune began to crumble. His name was never written, only referred to as the benefactor star. The later entries spoke of a night in 1873 when Thomas Mercer, Eliza's husband, disappeared during a storm and returned carrying a small black box and a promise that their family would never know poverty again. From that night forward, prosperity returned to the Mercers, but so did tragedy. Their first daughter, Abigail, died in her sleep just hours after turning 12. The townspeople called it fever, but Eliza knew better. Her writings grew desperate, filled with pleas to God and confessions of a pact sealed not with ink but with blood, hers, mixed with that of her daughter. It was a contract of exchange. The wealth and stability of the Mercer family would endure as long as each generation gave its firstborn daughter back to the benefactor before her 12th year ended. Evelyn discovered Clara reading the journal late one night by candlelight, her small hands trembling as she turned the fragile pages. She tried to snatch it away, but Clara clung to it, her eyes wide with realization. The truth was no longer folklore, it was recorded history. The curse wasn't some abstract superstition but a deal that had been honored generation after generation in silence. Evelyn read through the entries herself, feeling her stomach turn as she recognized the same dates, the same patterns, the same deaths repeated over and over. One passage, written in frantic script, warned that breaking the pact would require confronting the one thing the Mercer bloodline had hidden deep beneath their estate. It wasn't just a grave, it was the foundation of their curse. As Evelyn turned the final page, the candle flickered violently, and for a moment, she thought she heard a soft voice whisper from behind her, the words almost too faint to catch. The debt is not yet paid. As Clara's 12th birthday crept closer, sleep began to abandon her completely. Each night she lay awake, staring at the ceiling as the house groaned and settled like an old creature shifting in its sleep. Then came the dreams, not gentle, fleeting dreams, but vivid, suffocating visions that followed her into waking life. In them, she found herself standing in the middle of a candlelit room, surrounded by 12 girls dressed in identical white nightgowns. Their faces were pale and lifeless, yet familiar, each one a reflection of her own. They stood in a circle, holding hands, whispering words she couldn't understand, their voices a low hum that made her bones ache. When she tried to speak, they all turned toward her at once, eyes black as ink, lips moving in unison to form a single chilling warning, do not look in the mirror after midnight. The first time she woke from the dream, she thought it was just her imagination. But the next night, it came again, more vivid, the girls' whispers sharper, closer, as if they were no longer confined to her mind. She began to hear them even when she was awake, soft giggles echoing down the hallway, faint footsteps pacing outside her door. Once, while brushing her hair, she caught sight of movement in the mirror that didn't belong to her. A second reflection lingered half a second too long, its smile too wide, its eyes too knowing. When she blinked, it was gone. The warning from her dreams burrowed deep into her thoughts, and fear became her constant companion. As the days passed, the boundary between dream and reality dissolved. The girls from Clara's visions began to leave traces behind, wet footprints on her bedroom floor, strands of blonde hair identical to her own scattered across her pillow. The night before her birthday, Clara awoke to find her reflection already standing, watching her from inside the mirror, lips moving silently. Though no sound came through, she could read the words perfectly. It's almost time. Evelyn Mercer had always known that her family's wealth came from something unspeakable, though she had spent most of her life pretending not to believe it. But after finding her great-grandmother's journal and seeing what was beginning to happen to Clara, denial was no longer possible. The curse wasn't just a story, it was a contract, a debt that had been paid in blood for generations. Each time the family tried to break it, tragedy followed. Yet Evelyn refused to surrender her daughter to the same fate. Determined to end the cycle, she began to search for a way to undo what her ancestors had done. She spent days in the town's archives, combing through records of the Mercer estate, property maps, and local folklore. Every clue led her deeper into a history of secrecy and ritual, until she uncovered an old ledger written by the original patriarch, Thomas Mercer. It spoke of the night in 1873 when he met the benefactor a shadowed figure who promised him prosperity in exchange for the breath of the bloodline's daughters. It also described how the pact was sealed not with pen and ink, but with the blood of their firstborn child mixed into the soil beneath the estate. Evelyn realized that the key to breaking the curse was tied to that blood, to what had been buried and bound beneath their home. The ledger mentioned a hidden chamber under the foundations, a place where the pact had been made and where the first Mercer child's remains were laid to rest as an offering. The entry was brief, the words shaky and desperate, as if written by a man who had already begun to lose his mind. But it gave Evelyn a single, dreadful instruction: to break the promise, the blood must face the earth once more. She understood what it meant. Someone of the Mercer would have to confront what was buried there. That night, she gathered candles and tools and made her way to the root cellar, a place she had always avoided. Clara followed quietly, clutching her mother's hand, her eyes wide with fear. As they descended, the air grew colder, heavy with a damp, metallic scent. Evelyn found the spot described in the ledger, a patch of dirt darker than the rest, pulsing faintly under the flickering light. She began to dig, her hands shaking, the soil turning slick and warm beneath her fingers. Just as her hand brushed against something solid, a voice whispered from the darkness, soft and low. It wasn't Clara's voice, nor her own, but something ancient, familiar, and patient. The debt must be honored. The ground trembled beneath them, and Evelyn realized the curse wasn't simply waiting to be broken, it had been waiting for them to find it. The night before Clara's 12th birthday arrived cloaked in a silence so deep it felt unnatural. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath around the Mercer estate. Evelyn had sealed every window, lit every candle, and prayed over every corner of the house, her voice breaking as she whispered the same desperate plea, that her daughter might live to see morning. But as midnight drew near, something changed in the air. The warmth from the fire began to vanish, replaced by a chill that seeped into the bones of the house itself. The lights, candles sputtered, and from somewhere deep below the floorboards came a sound, a faint, rhythmic tapping, like fingernails against wood. Evelyn froze, her eyes darting toward the old root cellar door at the end of the hallway. Clara, pale and restless, had been pacing for hours. The voices had returned, clearer than ever. They whispered her name over and over, their tone almost gentle now, coaxing rather than frightening. She told her mother she needed to go downstairs, that someone was calling for her, a child crying for help. Evelyn tried to hold her back, clutching her tightly, but Clara's eyes were glazed, her movements stiff, as if she were being pulled by invisible hands. The closer the clock ticked toward midnight, the stronger the pull became. When the first chime echoed through the house, Clara slipped from her mother's grasp and walked barefoot down the hallway, her white nightgown brushing against the floor like mist. Evelyn followed, her voice trembling as she called out to her daughter, but Clara didn't turn around. The cellar door creaked open on its own, and a rush of cold air spilled out, smelling of earth and old decay. Clara stepped inside without hesitation, the dim candlelight casting her shadow across the stone walls. Evelyn followed her down the narrow steps, calling her name, but the darkness seemed to swallow her words. At the bottom of the cellar, the faint crying that had lured Clara grew louder, echoing from behind the old wooden shelves stacked with jars of preserves and dust-covered tools. She moved toward the sound and found, half hidden in the dirt floor, a small door she had never seen before, its edges sealed with wax, its handle rusted shut. As she touched it, the crying stopped, replaced by a deep, low hum that vibrated through the air. Evelyn reached her just as the door began to creak open on its own. What lay beyond was not darkness but a faint, pulsing light, like a heartbeat buried beneath the ground. Clara stepped through without fear, and the cellar door slammed shut above them, leaving only the echo of Evelyn's scream and the sound of something ancient awakening below. Evelyn's heart pounded as she forced the cellar door open again, the hinges protesting with a scream of rusted metal. The smell that hit her was heavier this time, a mixture of damp soil, rot, and something faintly metallic that made her stomach churn. She followed the faint glow seeping from the small hidden chamber, her candle trembling in her grip, casting long shadows across the stone walls. Inside, she found what she could only describe as a macabre museum of Mercer history. The room was filled with antique dolls, each perched carefully on shelves carved into the stone, their porcelain faces pale and cracked, their eyes staring blankly forward. But it wasn't the dolls themselves that made Evelyn recoil, it was what they represented. Each one bore an uncanny resemblance to a Mercer daughter, right down to the color of hair, the shape of the eyes, the tilt of the jaw. Some were missing eyes, others had mouths crudely stitched shut, and a faint red stain marred the hands of several, as if they had been used in a ritual too gruesome to comprehend. Evelyn's breath came in shallow gasps as she took in the chilling truth. This hidden chamber wasn't just a storage room, it was a record, a shrine, and a warning all at once. Each doll marked the death of a girl who had been born into the Mercer line, each carefully preserved as if to ensure the memory of the pact endured. The cries Clara had followed had been echoes of the lost daughters, trapped in some way within the dolls, reaching out through the years, longing for release. It was a sight that made Evelyn's skin crawl and her knees buckle, but she forced herself forward, desperate to find her daughter before the chamber claimed her too. Clara stood in the center of the room, staring at the largest doll on a pedestal. Its face was unmistakable, her own. The porcelain eyes seemed to glint in the candlelight, and a small, knowing smile curved its painted lips. Evelyn rushed to her side, but as she touched Clara's shoulder, the child froze, her gaze locked on the doll. And then, the room seemed to shiver. The candle flames flickered violently, shadows twisting across the walls in unnatural ways, and Evelyn realized with horror that the dolls were not lifeless, they were watching, aware, and somehow connected to the terrible fate that had claimed generations before. A low whisper slithered through the room, soft and sinister, seeming to come from all directions at once. Welcome back. Evelyn's mind reeled as she understood that this chamber, this collection of dolls, was not only a remnant of the past, it was a living testament to the curse, one that had been patiently waiting for the final act to unfold. The boundary between the living and the dead, between Clara and the fate that had haunted the Mercer girls for over a century, had begun to blur, and Evelyn felt the weight of centuries pressing down on her chest as the realization sank in. The truth of the curse was far darker than she had ever imagined. The room seemed to contract around them, the air growing thicker, almost viscous, as if the very walls were breathing. Clara's eyes remained fixed on the porcelain figure that mirrored her own face, but it was not the doll alone that drew her gaze. In the cracked, warped mirror leaning against the far wall, her reflection began to move independently. At first, it was subtle, a twitch of the corner of the mouth, a slight tilt of the head, but then the movements became deliberate, fluid, almost taunting. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat as she watched, realizing that the reflection was no longer her daughter's. It was something else, something older, something that had been waiting for this exact moment for more than a century. The reflection smiled in a way Clara never had, eyes glinting with knowledge and malice, lips parting to reveal teeth sharper than a child's should be. A cold shiver ran down Evelyn's spine as the whispers returned, louder now, echoing from every corner, bouncing off the stone walls, carrying the same chilling message. The truth must be seen. The reflection raised a hand, and Clara, frozen in fear, mirrored it. But when their fingers touched, the surface of the mirror rippled like water, distorting the image until multiple versions of Clara